大使館に3回勤務したら、最後は、保守党担当の政務担当の3時間、3歳、その前には労働担当をやったし、日本の労働組合に非常に詳しい。それから政治、経済の方の専門の人であります。だから僕が何よりも彼が好きなのは、非常に楽なの。何でもよく知って、いろんなことに興味を持って、特に世間のこと、アメリカの社会について、いつも僕にいろいろ教えてくれる、僕の一種のメンターです。僕はアメリカのジョークで分かんないのがあると、ニューヨークに彼に電話して聞くんです。向こうの朝起きた頃からね、やってね。で、そうすると、ちゃんと教えてくれると。で、こっちももし新メーターを手に入れると、こういうのがありますよって教えてあげると。そうするとまた一つ教えてくれると。だから、この前も9月に行った時、ブロードウェイ何見たらいいですかって言ったらば、It's all in the timing というコメディが面白い。4つのワンアクトコメディーズがつながって、で彼の推薦で、見に行って、昨日昔のドイツ役の仲間とか、大丸の卒業生弟子なんかがいるんで、そういえば、その前の方にでした、メールリンチにいる卒業生がいて、それが切符を手配してくれて、だからさすがやっぱり彼の推薦から面白いですね。その前の時も、だから、変な食い物が好きで、しょっちゅうエスニック料理屋探してて、前にはベルマ料理屋って言ってくれた。あんたんでベルマ料理食べるとは思わなかったですね。前田イタリア料理の面白いところ、大体安くてうまいところですよ。で今晩はこの後、姫路へ毎年夏と冬に2週間ぐらい集中講義に姫路独協大学へ。もったいないと言います。姫路独協って言いますか。いたら、多分言わないだろうな。多分ね、英語じゃなくて日本語でやる人です。だから学生たちに質問しないと、カッパじゃないと、まあ、そんなこと言わないでいい。だから、密かにそう言ってます。だからね、もったいないね、こういうのしてくれば。アメリカの経済ということで、社会そのもの、それから、例えば、チェンジングバリューですね、セクシズムの問題、セクシュアルハラスメントの問題、エンターテインメント、保守党が今度、共和党になっているので、そういったような問題については、おそらく大いに、みんな、もう一度出てもらったり、どんどん僕があんまりモダレートなんかやらないから、遠慮しないで質問をしないと、こういう時に質問に絶対しない人ってのは、できないね。絵の一番に質問する人。今日こういう形で持ったのは、コメントみんな持ってこないの持ってるでしょ。一応ね、ブラウンバッグレクチャーという形がアメリカの大学であるんです。ブラウンバッグっていうのは茶色い缶袋に、サンドイッチとかハンバーガーとか入れて、であとはまあ、敷いて、入ればオレンジ1個とか、で、こう入れた。大体飲み物は学校が出す。で、先生も最初はむちゃむちゃ食べながら、それで適当に、どうぞ食べていいんですよ。先生がちゃんと、ね、アメリカのサンドイッチのが大きくてうまいけども、まあ、どうせこの後、2次会、この後どっか行きましょうと、ちゃんとたこ焼きの食べに行こうと言ったら、彼からのI will enjoy 2次会と、ちゃんとロンマに2次会と分かってるんです。だから、この後、ぜひ、ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。私も、どうぞご利用ぐらい。行けば分かるけども、日本筋から言える。宮山さん、選手は何人ぐらいですか？いや、もう少し。不動産の組。明日10時から12時まで。10時から。私がこれ見てもおかしいとします。江坂でテニスやりますんで、今からでも何人か何人に来られたらばどうぞ。インドアとってやりますから雨が降っても大丈夫ですね。今の先生やってませんか。自分頑張りじゃない。でもこの人は教えてくれる。スキーの時は私に教えるから。2週間前に軽井沢へウェルズムに行ってきて、たった400メートルのゲレで1本しかない人工衛星。そういうのをマンメイドスノーツに学ぶんですね。アーティフィシャルスノーツ。終わりね。女の子とちょっとできないんで今。マンメイドスノーというのはね、アーティフィシャルスノーということによって、私はそういうことに無視ですけど、常に示してない。常に自分のね、潔白を証明してないと、ギルティをセクシズム。そうなんですよ。何名数とか言わない。そうだ。ここから一人。 おまけがいるんで、今度京都のねアメリカンセンターの館長になる人ですので、来年から、前に横浜の日本語学校ですね。もう予約に乗れる。じゃあ、give me your name again. Largent.じゃあ、皆さん。私がRobert Immerman, Mr. Robert Immerman, is the senior fellow at Columbia University, East Asia Institute. And this is Mr. David Largent. Dale. Like Dale Carnegie. Dale, exactly. Dale Largent. Largent. If that spelling looks familiar to you, that's what I thought. It's the French word for the money. Largent. Except this is English pronunciation. Largent, not Largent. Okay. And Mr. Largent is going to be, he's in the Foreign Service, Commission. And I think we met before when he was studying in Nihongo at the Foreign Service Institute, that is U.S. State Department, Japanese Language School in Yokohama. And I'm invited to give talk every once in a while. And he is going to be the director of the American Center in Kyoto, effective 1 January? Or?
In June.
In June?
June or July next year.
What are you doing until then?
I'm still in Yokohama.
Oh, still?
Like the rest of you, I'm studying the language still.
Maybe we can help each other. So,
Or maybe they can explain, we learned a new word in Japanese today, it's lunch. I will start with, it is kind of, if I read this carefully it's written in hiragana, Power lunch.
Power lunch.
So, if you come to Himeji, in America we talk about power breakfast. Where, you know, important people get together to talk business over breakfast. But I have never heard power lunch before, except in Himeji, and it's a delicious lunch for 2,000 yen in a little steakhouse. So I recommend you go to Himeji for power lunch at a place that's called Koichi. I'm making commercial there. Anyway, it's an honor to be here. This is part of reciprocal exchange between Mr. Muramatsu and myself. He came to Columbia University in September, and he gave a talk to students and faculty about communication in the U.S. and Japan and other aspects of U.S.-Japan relations. And he included many very amusing anecdotes. I don't think I can equal him in the humor, but I'll try. And I gather that all of you are in very advanced English language translation and interpreting programs, and that I can speak with you as if I was speaking with fellow countrymen and women. And I also understand that you have acquired enough self-confidence that you will ask me lots of questions in English. because I must say that in Himeji, where I'm teaching Japanese third year and fourth year students at a university called Himeji Dokyo Daigaku, it is very hard, if not impossible, to get the students to ask a question or to have any reaction whatsoever. A good part of them are sleeping. Some others are talking with each other. And there even were a few today reading comic books. So I think it's very sad. I won't let them talk, then I throw them out of the class. But I can't stop them from sleeping. Although I could maybe enforce the discipline of the old Japanese army, go by with a rod and hit them, wake them up. I have to say it's mostly the men who are sleeping. The women in general seem to pay more attention. And I have a theory that in Japan, in the university, it is not considered macho, meaning it's not considered masculine to be seen as too interested in your studies. So I think the men in general try to display indifference or boredom because that's what's expected of them. I think many of them are more interested than they let on. But anyway, they appear to be totally uninterested. Whereas some of the women are always taking notes and looking very alert. So I don't know if I can draw any deep conclusions from that. But that's my reaction to Himeji Dokyo University. And this is my 10th time teaching there. I come twice a year, once in the summer and once in the winter, or what you call in Japanese shuchu kogi. I translate that into English directly, intensive course. But it's not like any intensive course that I've ever had in the U.S. because I teach two subjects. One is called international relations, and the other is international organization. And I am supposed to be with these students for 6 hours a day for 10 days in the summer and 6 hours a day for 4 or 5 days in the winter. Well, it's very hard to face a group of students who show no reaction for 6 hours a day for 10 days. Because you have no way of knowing whether they are absorbing, whether they are learning, whether they are confused or not. Luckily, the school has very advanced audio-visual techniques. So I show them lots of video films, and I also tried something today, which was a first time for me and for them. I make them write a paper between the first half of the course and the second half on some books that I assigned. And I read all the papers and put grades on them, and then I called at random, as if by lottery, certain names, and then I gave them their papers back and told them they had to read these papers in front of the others. Well, some of them were horrified by this. And some are really, I think they were so embarrassed and scared that they just mumbled. You could hardly hear them. A few, though, were very effective, knew how to enunciate. And the only reason I go on at length about this is because I know Mr. Muramatsu wants me to talk a bit about the U.S. and Japan and relations and so on. But one of the things that I have noted at Columbia University since I've been there, where I am at Columbia, the School of International Affairs, it's a graduate school, 2-year program, and 1/3 of the students are foreign, who come from many, many countries. Of those foreign students, the largest number are Chinese, from the 4 different Chinas, mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, overseas Chinese. They're both there. The largest single group, Chinese. Second largest group, Japanese. And then you have Koreans, Southeast Asians, Indians, Pakistanis, Latin Americans, not so many Europeans, but now getting a lot of Russians and Central Asians and Latin Americans. And I would say of all the national groups, the group that has the most difficulty adjusting to American-style seminar Japanese. Japanese students find it extremely painful to have to not only ask questions, but participate in debate. And apparently in Japanese universities, there's no training in argument, no training in debate. And if you disagree with somebody, it's almost like you're insulting them. So you can't have people jump up and say, I don't disagree, or I think differently. And of course, in the graduate level, there are some courses where the professor simply lectures for an hour. But most of the courses, the professor acts as the moderator. He assigns, or she assigns, some work, some book to read, some project, and then there is a leader of a discussion. And all the members of the seminar are supposed to participate. And if you don't participate actively in the class, your grade is not very good, because you're judged not only by the written paper, but by how well you present your arguments. So many Japanese students have great difficulty. And I saw in your catalog, this is not a commercial for Simon, but I saw in your catalog that you have a course, I think, called Let's Discuss or Let's Argue or whatever it is. And I think that's absolutely vital for Japanese students now going to America, England, Australia, Canada to study. They are falling behind because they cannot, particularly in schools of international affairs, public affairs, languages, literature, because they can't argue and debate. Engineering, science is something else. You work alone, or you work in a laboratory, and debate and discussion is not that important. But in the social sciences and liberal arts, it's very important in the Anglo-Saxon and even in the French educational system to debate and discuss. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that Japanese students have on the graduate level. I must say, again, I'm not making a commercial, but I'm very curious to see that there are differences among the Japanese students who come. And the ones, in general, that appear to be the best prepared are graduates of two universities, ICU and Sophia. Both those universities seem to do very well in training their students in communicating internationally. And I must say that those going to some of the very, very famous Japanese universities, the some that are the most prestigious, I won't say which ones I'm thinking of, but some that in Japan are considered to be at the top, those students don't do well at all, because they come from universities which appear to be very tradition-minded and don't encourage a lot of discussion and debate. Well, what else can I tell you about what is going on in America today? Let me say that, first of all, we are all suffering a great shock from the outcome of the most recent election. I don't know how much publicity that received in Japan, but for the first time in 40 years, both the upper house and lower house of the American Parliament, what we call the Congress, are in the hands of Republicans. And the Republicans that won are quite right-wing. Right. That's Newt Gingrich. Right. And these are very right-wing people who have won. Very ideological. I don't think there's anything comparable in contemporary Japanese politics to equal some of these people. Some of them are very much like pre-war Japanese politicians. Very nationalistic, very, how shall I say, conservative, very much opposed to social programs, very much opposed to foreign aid, very much opposed to immigration, a very dangerous phenomenon. And I think this is going to make Mr. Clinton's life even more difficult. Oh, oops. There we go. Right. Thank you. Thank you. So, nobody's quite sure what will happen when these people take power in January, we have a presidential election less than 2 years from now. And American presidential election campaigns go on for a very long time, because it's not like the Japanese system where you dissolve the parliament and have only a month to campaign. We have direct election of president. And we also have a system of presidential primaries where the candidate is picked not in a back room or in a tea house or in a restaurant. The candidate is picked through a series of elections that win him delegates to a convention. And at the convention, then there is an open vote. And my impression is that Mr. Clinton now will be challenged for his leadership of the Democratic Party. So he will have a very rough time. And he may or may not win the nomination. But I think he's going to have a difficult time being reelected. And I think his only hope is that the Republican candidate is so extreme, is so right-wing, that people realize that Clinton, in spite of his imperfections and mistakes, is better than what the Republicans have to offer. But you have now, once again in the United States, a debate on all these social issues. And the funny thing is, normally people vote their pocketbook, as we say. They vote on economic issues. I think in most countries, in Japan, in the United States, in Europe, what affects people most? Is it good times, bad times? Do they have a job? Don't they have a job? But in the United States now, the economic conditions are getting very, very good. I mean, the unemployment's at the lowest it's been in 10, 15 years. It's a boom. In some places like California are still having problems, but in general, very, very good economic conditions. So, this mood of anger and unhappiness is not like it was in, let's say, the end of Carter, beginning of Reagan years, when there was a high unemployment or high inflation or whatever. Now, very little inflation, good growth, expansion of jobs. So why, and no more Cold War? What is it that's bothering Americans? My impression is that these social issues, crime, drugs, the threat to traditional values, people are upset by certain things that are taught in the schools and not taught in the schools. Or some people are opposed to abortion. Some people want prayer in the schools. So very ideological debates, again, like you had in Japan in the pre-war period. And a lot of debate on what is it to be an American. If you're an American, must you speak English or not? If you're an American, must you do this or that? And very much like the debates you used to have in Japan on what is it to be Japanese. And I think when people start debating such issues, it's very dangerous for a country, because then you cause great differences. In Japan, whenever you start a debate on who is a Japanese or what is a Japanese, then you have problems with the Korean minority, you have problems with the half Japanese, you have a lot of difficulties. And in America, when we have a debate on who is an American, or what is an American, it draws lines that separate people, so it's very dangerous. And that's what's starting. I don't think this election is going to have direct effect on Japan as such, because I think one thing that both Democrats and Republicans, from the left to the right, all share is that they all want to see Japanese market open more to American goods. And between Japan and the U.S., that's the major issue. There are really no political issues now, direct. Japan has no serious human rights problem. Japan and the United States have military alliance. It's basically the trade issue. And on that issue, Democrats and Republicans think, I mean, they think about the same. Maybe the style is different, but it's basically the same. But where it's going to affect Japan is indirectly on sort of what you might call third country or multilateral issues. If there is some serious crisis on Korean Peninsula, if North Korea decides not to keep its word on this treaty, and if something happens, there will be a strong voice in America saying, this is mainly Japanese problem, and then an American problem, because Japan is closer to Korea. And so Japan should play the major role, and Japan should get involved militarily. And why should we do it? Why should we save the Japanese? So you're going to have, and then on other UN issues, there'll be pressure not to come up with money unless the Japanese come up with money, or not to contribute troops unless the Japanese do so. Not just directed at Japan, but directed at the Europeans as well. But the Europeans are more accustomed to playing active role, with the possible exception of the Germans. Whereas Japan, people are much less, shall we say, accustomed to having Japanese military go overseas or having any kind of very active international role. So I think this will be, could be a major issue. Now I think here in the Kansai, you're going to be suddenly faced with big international issues next fall when APEC has its meeting here in Osaka. And I think this will be in some ways bigger event than Expo 70 because you're going to have 16, 17 heads of state here in a big circus. And the security problem is going to be enormous because some of these heads of state in Asia have political enemies. Not all of them are democracies. And I mean, so you may have some trouble. And my impression is that next October, I guess, when you're going to have APEC, Osaka will become like an occupied city. I would strongly advise any of you who are not married, don't schedule your wedding for the period when APEC is meeting, because I think it will be impossible to move around the city of Osaka at that time. I think that's the best time to take a vacation to Hawaii or Guam.
Okinawa.
Or Okinawa, exactly. So that will be a big event in Japan and the United States. But for Japan, now Japanese diplomacy, we think, is going to have big tests because it's up to the Japanese now as the host to try to get some kind of agreed formula that all of these 18 nations can accept to show progress beyond what was decided this year. And in APEC, you don't take votes. You have to have consensus. So all these people, ranging from Bill Clinton to Mahathir of Malaysia, and including the Chinese, all have to agree. And that's not going to be easy. Because up to now, these APEC summits have been very vague and general, but now the tough work begins. Now they made an agreement to have free trade in Asia Pacific among the industrialized countries by the year 2010, and on the other countries, 2020. But now how do you get there? What is the formula? What steps are taken? Going to be in the hands of the Japanese. In that connection, I would think, connection with APEC, many of you may get a lot of good jobs as interpreters or interpreter guides in that period. That may, who knows how that's going to be handled. But I would think it's going to be a very exciting time in a professional sense for those of you who are doing interpreting and translating. And it's interesting, I have been following APEC very closely since last year. And after the Seattle meeting, right away, all the documents were there. The American staff got them all out. In Indonesia, it took at least 10 days before you could get texts of anything. So I think in Japan, probably we'll have the text before the decisions are made. Anyway, it will be very interesting to see how Japan handles this. And it'll be interesting to see whether it's the same prime minister, or whether you have a new prime minister by then, or what kind of political system you'll have. Well, what else can I tell you? There's a lot of interest in Japan in terms of cultural developments here. People were somewhat surprised and quite pleased that the Japanese won the Nobel Prize. And Oe Kensaburo is not terribly well known in the United States, but among intellectuals, yes. Most of his books exist in English translation. And I noticed the other day at the big Barnes & Noble store in my neighborhood, right in the front of the store now were 5 of his books lined up. So they've been quickly brought back into print. And people thought he had a lot of courage in turning down Japanese government award, and also that even more courage in what he said in Stockholm. I'm curious to know whether his speech got a lot of publicity here in Japan. But it was considered very clever, almost brilliant speech, in which he did a parody of Kawabata, who's talked about Japan the beautiful and I, and Oi Kensaburo talked about Japan the ambiguous and I, and gave it much more political tone. So he has gotten a lot of attention. And then recently, somebody that Mr. Muramatsu knows quite well, Peter Grilli, who's an American who does a lot of writing about Japan, various aspects of Japanese culture, produced a television film on a very famous Japanese musician, Takemitsu Toru, as a 1-hour television documentary. I think if it hasn't been shown already, it will be shown on NHK. It's in a series on the great living composers of the world. And I guess he's considered to be Japan's outstanding modern composer. So it was a very successful program. Other than that, I'm not sure what other phenomena have come from Japan lately. We've had, in the past, some very successful Japanese opera stars and some theater. Tamasaburo is quite a following in the United States. He was the only Japanese who was invited to the 100th anniversary of the Metropolitan Opera as a special performer. So he has great following in New York City. And every so often one of his movies is revived there. It's always sold out. But people are very aware in New York of the latest trends in Japanese culture. Sometimes I think they're more aware in New York than they are here in Japan of the latest sort of avant-garde things. And I know you in Japan are very much aware of the latest Broadway musicals and the latest shows. There are lots of good revivals of old musicals on Broadway, and it's mainly in Japanese and Taiwanese tourists and Hong Kong tourists, some Europeans, that keep some of these musicals alive, because Cats has been running now for 12, 13 years, and I think most of the customers are either American high school students or Japanese tourists.
They buy the best seats.
Right. And the other big thing is in America in general. Of course, Japanese food has been very, very popular for quite a long time. But now the latest trend is to go beyond French Nouvelle Cuisine and use Japanese ingredients with Western food a great deal. And there are new restaurants opening that specialize in this. And there's one new one in New York that is very difficult to get into. Next time you come, we must go there. It's called Nobu. And that's a nickname for the owner, who is a very unusual Japanese, who started a restaurant in Alaska. The restaurant burned down. Then he moved to Peru, and the restaurant there failed. The third time, I think you have an expression in Japanese, the third time you succeed, right? And the third time was in Los Angeles, where he had a restaurant which still is in existence, a tremendous success. And the financing of this restaurant comes in part from a very famous actor, Robert De Niro, and who is providing a lot of the money. And this restaurant is very popular among the very glamorous people in New York, the fashion models and the young actors and so on. And it's very hard to get a reservation there. It's a bit expensive by New York standards, but by Japanese standards it's very inexpensive. And it mixes Japanese, Latin American, and American style ingredients and foods. and got excellent reviews. So lots of raw fish, but done in very creative ways, because they do a lot of making marinated raw fish, the Latin American ceviche, they call it, which is taking raw fish and soaking it in lemon and spices for maybe several hours. And so it's slightly different from Japanese style. But many other, I haven't been there, so I'm just telling you what I've read and heard. But it's very much talked about. So if you go to New York, try to go to Nobu restaurant. Well, I think I'm running out of steam, so I would like to turn the floor over to my colleague Dale Largent, who can talk to you about whatever he wants, and then we can have some questions.
I think you've already hit on just about everything, so.
Excuse me, may we meanwhile eat?
Sure. Let's,
Me too.
sure, okay.
Quietly.
Oh, everybody's waiting for me? I see.
So, I've been in Japan now for about 4 or 5 months. I arrived here in August, and I have to say that I started studying Japanese a year ago, August, so it's been a year and 4 or 5 months. So I look at all of you as my senpai, because you've been at this a lot longer than I have. As a result, I haven't really gotten into I haven't started my job. I haven't really poured into what sort of work I'll be doing when I get to the American Center next year. So this kind of interaction with Japanese audiences is very enlightening for me, because it gives me a chance to get a taste beforehand what I'll be doing next year when I get to Kyoto. For your information, I'm finding the Japanese language difficult. That probably is not surprising to you, but I studied Chinese before I entered the Foreign Service, and found that Chinese was much easier to grasp in the conversational side. That the grammar was more similar to English. In fact, a lot of people say there is no grammar in Chinese. That's not really true, but it's much, much simpler. You don't have the you don't have the verb problems. You don't have the change in syntax that you do in Japanese. Japanese is a bit more work in the conversation. Having the kanji helps, of course, when it comes to reading, and so I can relax a little bit more on that side, but it's really the conversation that I need for my work starting next year. I was assigned to Beijing on my first and my last assignment. I've only had one assignment in the Foreign Service thus far, and worked primarily with the Fulbright program, educational exchanges programs in Beijing. I haven't had the opportunity to work with Japanese simultaneous translators yet, because I haven't started working here. I did have one opportunity in Beijing to work with your Chinese professional counterparts, and I have to say I have a great deal of respect for people who can do that. It was quite an experience for me, having never been able to sit there and listen to that voice coming through simultaneously. I have not been in the United States as recently as Bob has, so I can't talk so much from the American perspective, perhaps, on what's happening in Japan, but I could just make a couple of comments about things that have happened perhaps since I've been here, and things that we're working on with the Japanese very closely on their issues that are concerned to both of us, and Bob has mentioned them both. But one, of course, is the APEC summit that he mentioned, and since I'll be moving down here to the Kansai region next summer, we're going to be right in the middle of that, as well as many of you, I'm sure, and your friends and associates here in Osaka. I'm told that one of the reasons that we still have an office in Kyoto is because every American that comes to Tokyo wants to come to Kyoto also. And I'm sure that the APEC summit next year will be no exception to that rule. So we'll be plenty busy there as well. One of the interesting issues that APEC has dealt with in the last year or two, and one that they sort of shelved this year, is how many countries should they admit to this association. It's the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. And as you know, there are 4 American countries that are in that group. Canada, the United States, Mexico, and this year, Chile entered APEC as well. So we now have 18 countries total that are in the organization. There are other Latin American countries that are knocking on the door, would like to get in as well. And the conference this year, at the conference this year, they decided that they're going to, for the next couple of years, freeze the admission of more countries until they sort of figure out where they want this organization to go. They've got other issues, as Bob mentioned, primarily how to implement the agreements now that have been made in the last 2 years. So they're not going to be admitting new countries in the near future. But I find this an interesting issue because in the lead up to the Miami summit, which you may have read about recently, just a week ago or so, in Miami there was a summit held of Latin American, Central American, North American leaders to talk about free trade in the Americas. And I've been listening some to the radio here, and one program that I found interesting one morning as I was getting ready for school was a discussion by some economists here who were making noises to the effect that they're rather concerned about the move toward free trade in the Americas because that could lead to a trading bloc that would be difficult for other Asian countries to enter and deal with. One of the issues that might, in APEC, that could help to offset that would be to open APEC to these countries as well that would like to get into APEC, and through that avenue we could keep trade open, you see, in the Asia-Pacific region, rather than worrying so much about whether this new trade agreement in the Americas is going to eliminate competition from Asia. But apparently that's going to be put on a back burner for a while until the organization can sort out some of the other issues that are important to it. One other issue that is important to Japanese-American relations and that we've had a lot of dialogue about in the recent past is the North Korean nuclear program. The decision by North Korea a year and a half ago, I believe, to withdraw, if necessary, from the NPT and to start developing nuclear weapons, but essentially to more or less go their own way on nuclear issues. As you know, there's been a lot of negotiation about this, and the agreement that was signed in October, I think, has caused all of us to breathe a sigh of relief because we didn't really know what was going to be happening there in the earlier part of this year. What's interesting now is, from what I see coming from Washington, D.C., is that we've been carrying on discussions with the Korean. One of the elements to this agreement is that if the Koreans comply, if IAEA is allowed to actually make on-site investigations and confirm that they've stopped their nuclear program and are complying with the agreement, that we are going to move in the direction of establishing economic and political relations with North Korea, and that way bringing them into the international community. We have actually been carrying on discussions with them and have made some progress towards establishing diplomatic offices with the North Koreans. And so there's been some progress on that. as you are probably aware, there's also resistance to the agreement in the American Congress, particularly some of the conservative, some of the Republican members that are concerned that we've given away too much in terms of providing them with petroleum and other assistance early on in this process, and not required enough and strict compliance measures in the agreement. So it'll be interesting to see how this comes out. I think the people that I've been hearing from in the administration sound as though they feel that the agreement will probably be accepted in Congress eventually, once the congressmen weigh that option against what other.
I want to say that the reputation of Simon Academy is at stake. You're expecting lots of questions. Who's going to be the first to break the ice? You know that expression?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Immerman mentioned your experience in Kyoto University, and also Mr. Major said he's still struggling to study Japanese. And as far as I'm concerned, the majority Japanese who is studying who is studying English and have a good command of English are women. And I don't see so many men who are studying English. Whereas when it comes to the special Japanese who have a very good command of English and made it to the top, like Mr. Muramatsu, are men. And and whereas as far as I'm concerned, when I see foreign countries, foreigners who are studying Japanese so enthusiastically are men. So do you come up with any idea why Japanese women try to study English and foreign men try to study Japanese? And also, I would like to ask a question. When we study English, does it have to do with inborn talent? I mean, the more practice, the better. People say practice makes perfect, but others say everything depends on the inborn talent. Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, Mr. Muramatsu knows more about language than I do, but my own impression is that the study of language is difficult for adults and much easier when you are a child. Whatever the language, it doesn't make any difference, because no language is inherently more difficult than another language. It's just that it seems so when you approach it from a different background. I mean, probably if you had to learn Eskimo language and 18 different words for snow, how do you tell the difference in the snow quality if you're far? It's very difficult, right? But if you were born Eskimo, you learn that. The problem of learning language when you are an adult, whatever foreign language it is, you always start asking the question, why? And there's no answer to that question. You can't say, why do you say this? There's no logical reason. That's the way it is. And out of the pattern of the language, grammar develops. But you can't approach study of language the way you study chemistry or physics or a discipline that's based on logic. Language may have an inherent logic that's found in it, but it evolves. When you learn Japanese, you weren't asking, why do I say that word? You said it because that's what you heard. If you, as a child, you wanted something, and you saw others, adults saying it, that's how you say it. So the system of teaching language now, which I think is very good, is this mimicking, is this memorizing, is repeating. But for an adult, it's very boring, right? When you have to, the teacher says, konnichiwa, or good morning, and you say back, good afternoon, back and forth, this is a pen, what is a pen, what is a pencil, back and forth. It gets boring. But that's the only way to master the pattern. And my own impression is the more you use it, the better you are. I don't think it has anything to do with intelligence, IQ levels, or anything like that. Some of the best language speakers are people who learn language on the street, who haven't had formal education. So A lot has to do with your own personality. If you're a very inhibited or shy person, it's sometimes very difficult to learn a language because you're afraid to use. You're afraid of making mistakes. And with Japanese, the big problem is what English stands for in this country. And this is a problem created by the Ministry of Education. English is one of the ways in which you separate one Japanese from another. Go higher, right? And so many Japanese have learned English the wrong way through the cramming for university entrance exam. And it's not living English. There's a story I can tell you that some of us in the American Embassy, many, many years ago, there was a scandal here about the test exams on the English entrance to university being leaked by payment of money. That happens from time to time here in Japan. Okay, so the leaked examination was published in one or many of the newspapers, and several of us saw this, and we could not have passed that exam. I mean, the question about should or would, and the test, you just, we couldn't see the difference. We couldn't figure out whether this was said this way or that was said that way. You know, that's not the way. Language is supposed to be living. I find Japanese don't have the same problems about other languages. Japanese who start at the university level studying Arabic or Spanish or some even more, obscure language like Malay, do very well. If you look at some of the students going to Osaka Gaigo or Kyoto Gaigo or Tokyo Gaigo, majoring in relatively rarely spoken languages as far as Japan is concerned, they make great progress because you don't have this inhibition of if I make a mistake, I will be rated lower. So I think that the big problem in Japan is the Ministry of Education and the use of English for a purpose that it wasn't intended, which is to weed out people, keep some people from going through the door to the national university. That's what it's all about. And unless that changes, you're going to still have this complex. Now the other part of your question, I guess I've forgotten, but maybe you should answer. Tell me the first part. Oh, women. Women immersion. That was a very interesting point. And let me make an observation, and you can join in, but I think you're right in the observation. I think it's absolutely true that more foreign men study Japanese than women. Because mainly in the diplomatic service, it's voluntary. And the reason is that, rightly or wrongly, Western women consider Japan a very difficult place to work professionally. I think in practice, it's not as difficult as they think it is. Because I think Japanese judge foreigners by their katagaki, their, if you will, rank or the position they fill, much more than they do by gender. But if you are just the wife here of a foreigner, it's very hard to have a serious conversation with a Japanese male. You see it at cocktail parties in foreign embassies. Japanese men will talk to the foreigner. They will never talk to somebody who's considered the wife. And you may have here in Japan a husband and wife couple who are both professional. And the women feel that they are being put down. They are not being treated as equal. And they feel very frustrated. So there is a feeling of not, wanting to study here in Japan. Now this doesn't happen, I guess, in China. My impression is there are quite a few foreign women who study Chinese and go to Hong Kong or Beijing, or as far as I know, but you can correct me on that. The other thing is why Japanese men don't study to be interpreters or don't take English. I think in Japan, traditionally, it's been considered better to work for Japanese companies rather than foreign companies. And there's more security, and so you study English to get jobs with foreign companies, and that's a way for Japanese women to get good professional work, but a lot of Japanese men don't want to take that route. On the other hand, I think things are changing from what I see at Columbia University, in the graduate school where I sit. You used to have two types of Japanese exchange students coming for master's degree. You would have women who came on their own, paying their own way. sent by their family, or they had worked a bit and saved up. And the men, for the most part, had gone to work for Japanese companies and were being sent by the company. That used to be the pattern, but it's changing there quite dramatically. Many Japanese men are quitting their jobs here in Japan, and they know it's very hard to make a new start here in Japan. Just go to another company, because if you quit, there must be something wrong with you. So they go, they quit and come to United States or Australia or England for a year or two of study, and then they put themselves back on the job market. Sometimes with a foreign firm, sometimes Japanese firms that are hiring. A lot of Japanese firms come to American universities to recruit Japanese to work for them, for their overseas offices, or to get a different kind of Japanese, whatever. So I think it's changing in the sense that I see more young Japanese males coming to American universities on their own, starting new careers. And at Columbia, in the last few years, two somewhat revolutionary occurrences have taken place. One was a young fellow sent by the Ministry of Labor. He spent 2 years at Columbia. He then came back to Japan, and within 6 months he quit the ministry because he felt that they weren't using his talents correctly. Now, that was quite astounding, because in Japan you're supposed to normally, particularly in government offices, wait in turn, right? He quit, and he went to study law here because he wants to have some kind of public contribution. He wants to be eventually do public service law. He's very involved very concerned with environmental and occupational health and safety. That's what he did in the Ministry of Labor. Very concerned about the way companies here put chemicals in things or pollute and this and that. There's not enough lawyers exposing this, blah, blah, blah. So he did that. Second revolutionary act was a young man from the Ministry of Finance who last June, 2 weeks before he was supposed to come back to Japan, announced that he was quitting the Ministry of Finance and going to run for the Diet from Hiroshima Prefecture as an independent candidate. And everybody was shocked by this. But he felt that he wanted to change Japanese politics, and the only way to do this, he thought he would lose at least his first 2 elections. He was convinced of that. And he was going to try to get money from friends. I asked him, do you come from a rich family? He said, no. He was going to try to get friends and former colleagues to help support him. And he said he thought he would win on the 3rd time. But I thought that was very courageous, but very daring. So that kind of thing, I think, is starting to occur. It's too long an answer. Let me...
I could just add a couple of things, perhaps. On the question of Chinese language students, I taught English in Taiwan a few years ago, and I think that there were probably, looking at this particular group, there was a higher percentage of men in the classes there, but it wasn't half. It was well below half. So there were more women in Taiwan studying English. And of course, all of my examples are simply anecdotal, but when I did work with simultaneous interpreters in Beijing, they were both men, and they were excellent. So that's been my
I have a comment on the question and Bob's answer. I very much agree with Bob. The reason that most of the veteran interpreters in Japan seem to be men is that in those days there were some surplus men couldn't get into the Ministry of Finance or Asahi Shimbun, like Kunihiro, Thomas-san, or myself. Today, so far, we have a relative surplus of very well educated, motivated, energetic young women in relation to demand or market. Men could get into big organizations, established. Robert Immerman. We have to lean on a tree, might as well pick a big tree, right? And with a big shade to protect you from the sun. But the woman, you were 20, and you didn't want to, hard-working woman like you didn't want to go to big show shop to start serving tea or making Xerox copies. So you think, well, maybe I'll try traveling. But today, the situation is changing. I don't think there's any gender difference as to whether woman is more qualified or suitable to become men. It's more a matter of individuals. Precisely as Bob said, it's a matter of individual inclination or aptitude or habit. If you are too self-conscious, you are not good as instructor. You should not be an introvert. You should be ready to mimic. I mimic. I've been mimicking all my life. I mimic a New York, Brooklyn accent. I mimic Australian accent. I mimic Indian accent very well. And I came back from Okinawa 2 days ago. I learned quite a few phrases in Uchinaguchi, Okinawa dialect, like Uchariba Chobe, Uchariba Chode, Uchariba, what was that? Once you meet your friends, I have a tomodachi. It's very interesting. So anyone who is ready to mimic and never too shy to ask questions has to be corrected, become naturally good linguist. It's simple as that. And for the information of you women, let me tell you that. So anyone who is ready to mimic and never too shy to ask questions has to be corrected, become naturally good linguist. It's simple as that. And for the information of you women, let me tell you that whenever I hear comments, a loaded question, don't you think women are better linguists than men? I think that is sexist oriented question. I rebut that. I counter argue that all the time. No, basically no difference. It's a matter of individuals.
I agree, of course, and I think it's very bad to have stereotyping, and that happens a lot in this country. You know, your former prime minister some years ago made the comment that one of the reasons you shouldn't liberalize the import of beef was Japanese had different shaped intestines. How did he know that? I mean, and I must say the Japanese Americans were furious at that, because what did that mean? They had intestines that weren't too good for digesting meat, and they were eating it all the time? I mean, so you have this categorizing or these stereotypes that women can do this or men can do this. It's nonsense. You can do what you're trained for, and the aptitudes have to be developed. In Japan now, women have much more opportunity than they did before, but certainly nowhere near as many opportunities as I would say women in the West. And I don't think you're going to see a Japanese foreign minister or a Japanese prime minister as a woman for quite some years. I think it's going to, the society is not yet willing to do that. There's no reason why it shouldn't. They probably do a better job than some of the ones you have now. But that's not because they'd be women, but because they're talented. In the United Nations mission of Japan, very interesting phenomenon, you see. In the first year of the woman, I think that was 1974 or 75, it was a big UN conference. And every country was asked to submit statistics about the number of women engaged in diplomatic work. And Japan was apparently number 3 from the bottom. The bottom was Saudi Arabia, and then there was, I think, Yemen, and then Japan. The Japanese government was very embarrassed by this. So what happened? They immediately went out and recruited a person who has now become extremely famous, Ogata Sadako, to be the first woman as minister at the Japanese mission to the United Nations, political appointment. And now you have, in the Japanese mission to the UN, the so-called women's post. It's a joke. It's the token post. There's one woman always in a senior position, but always handling the same thing. Social issues, the third committee, where the women are supposed to be. And why couldn't you have a woman as political counsel? The UN is one of the best places for women in terms of the foreign missions, in terms of positions in the Secretariat. There's considered to be discrimination against them, but nevertheless, it's a very easy place because you're all different nationalities, ethnic groups, religious groups, this and that. Very easy to function there. But we have now first time, the top person is our ambassador there, Madeleine Albright, a woman. She's considered quite good, very tough. and she is becoming big rival to our Secretary of State, and there's some rumors that she wants his job, and so, I mean, she operates just as a very skillful and aggressive diplomat and politician. And I'm not sure that there's any difference between the way a man would operate and a woman would operate in what's going on in the top level of the UN. So I don't think she's better. I don't think she's worse because she's a woman in that job. But can be done. So I think here you have, I don't know, my own feeling in Japan is that you still have a lot of thinking from pre-war Japan. It still is very strong in the older generation here. In Japan, the older generation never retires. If you look at your diet, my gosh, there are people there way up in years. I mean, I gather in Hyogo Prefecture, there's this diet member who's going to celebrate his 50th anniversary now as a diet member. Well, I can't imagine, I think and I can't imagine he would be a proponent of liberalizing employment practices in Japan. I don't know, but I would doubt it. But I think that because you have so many very old people running Japanese society, very hard. Seems to me to have change here. That's what, and the change comes very, very gradually, and on these issues, I guess you just have to keep pushing and talking. But the only thing I would say to encourage you, a good friend of mine and Mr. Muramatsu, Mrs. Kimata, once said to me, she was a very high official in the Ministry of Labor, and she is now the head of Body Shop Japan. I think you know the company. And she said that in Japan, because you have shoji screen and not doors, it's not necessary to push, you just slide around. And that was her tactic, to slide around these problems instead of pushing from the front.
By the way, many Simon students, even those below the intermediate level, study English very effectively and very easy to get into American graduate schools. We had just one recently returned from the University of Chicago Business School, having finished MBA. Keiko Hasegawa, just 2 weeks ago, married and became Mrs. Tatsumi. And I'm sure you agree about the American students debating questioning habit.
Yeah, very used to having the argument with each other without any discussions. But here at Brawn in Japan, we should have consideration what other parties think of me and my opinion, and I should be in a good harmony with other opinions, so that I have to be pretty critical when I have a debate with Japanese in Japan.
Okay, we are now discussing in English. Would you like to debate or argue with
I don't think so. We are still in Japan.
Oh, no.
No, please, if we, take issue with anything you want to say. Actually, we have one of your former interpreters who's completing a PhD course in politics, Kobori.
Oh,
at
Takako
Columbia.
Kobori. Yep.
Takako Kobori, who's working on a PhD in politics
Columbia.
at Columbia. And she's doing
Congratulations.
extremely well. She passed her oral exams,
Good.
so now she has to do the research for and write her thesis. But it's, to pass your oral exams for a PhD in the United States at a university like Columbia is not easy. And so she deserves tremendous credit for that. Very, very talented person.
PhD from Columbia is much better than MBA and MBA from the University of Chicago.
Well, getting a PhD in MBAs or MPAs, from professional schools in the United States, if you work hard, you get it. But PhD system is very medieval. In the United States and Europe, the professors try to limit, right? Because you want to limit the supply, because every PhD is a threat to them, right? So they're very strict, and there's no guarantee whatsoever that you're going to make it, because you have to have some very good powers of analysis, and you also have to be, to some extent, a politician, and know how to please a sufficient number of professors on your examining panel by adopting their approaches, particularly in the social sciences and humanities. It's my own impression. So she was able to negotiate this. Because at Columbia, you have a big battle in political science between those of us who specialize in regional study and like to be very concrete, and the political theorists who are very abstract and who don't think you need to know anything about any particular country. Not necessary. You just develop good political theory, and it's like scientific theory. It just applies everywhere. So if you have good political theory, it's like knowing the basic charts of the elements in chemistry. You can then put together a combination that will predict what will happen in China, what will happen in Japan, whatever. Now, those of us in the regional field don't agree with that. But they, on the other side, don't agree with the regional studies people. So Ms. Kobori had to go right in the middle of that, you see?
Political theories never can predict or prevent civil wars or regional wars.
That's right. That's right.
It's like in interpreting. People ask for theories in interpreting. To me, theories don't work. It works in practice. It doesn't work in theory.
Nobody predicted what happened in Yugoslavia. Everybody thought Yugoslavia was the best country in Eastern Europe, the most successful, and Sarajevo, as the capital of the Winter Olympics, was a jewel in Yugoslavia. Nobody thought that those people who did such a great job hosting the Olympics and lived side by side for so many years, that 7, 8 years later would be killing each other. It's almost impossible to believe. And that's what's happening. So no political theorists knew that.
Another question?
I have a question. It's related to politics. And how do I want us to know whether Democrats or not?
Well, in my case, I have voted mostly Democratic, although last year I voted for a Republican for mayor of New York, because I thought it was necessary to have a change.
I usually vote Democrat as well.
Okay, all right.
I won't call myself a Democrat. I usually vote Democrat.
Is it, by the way, polite to ask that question? In general, do people always ask?
I would say it depends on the time and the place.
Uh-huh.
I think if you asked a foreign service, a career diplomat,
Yes.
that question in front of his boss, the Secretary of State, it would be very impolite. Because you are supposed to be technically, as a career diplomat, nonpartisan, right? And you have your right to vote, but you should keep not saying it. On the other hand, apart from government officials, perfectly fine. And people are always, people volunteer the information in the United States. People will tell you, I'm a staunch Republican, or I've always voted Democrat, except blah, 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 whatever. So it's perfectly polite. I think in Japan, it's not so polite, right?
Well, a lot of people don't know any specific political party which they feel they belong to. So, I don't know. I don't think as a Japanese would consider the question implied.
Right now, we don't know which party is good or not.
Right.
You don't know which parties you have. They keep changing.
Shinto.
Yes, you now have what? Shinto. That sounds like, I thought it was this bakery in, what is that? Shinto, yes. I'm very confused.
But anyway, I heard that former Congressman Mr. Singers wanted to establish a third party, and he thinks that Colin Powell would be a candidate for the president. And I would like to invite your opinion on that. Politics is not my specialization at all, so I would like to.
Well, you were talking about this, so why don't you,
Actually, there's been a lot of speculation about Colin Powell for, ever since he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and particularly since his retirement. I think he got one of the largest advances on his memoirs in the history of American publishing. It was a very much awaited book. But no one really knows which party he belongs to. He's never made a public declaration of that. And so he's been, to some degree, I think, sort of polled by both parties to see if they could get him to endorse or even to run for office. And when I was in Washington until last summer, every now and then you'd see an article about it in the Washington Post, and I got the impression then that he was considering, making a run for some kind of public office, but he hadn't decided. At that point, I think he wanted to wait until the book was finished and these elections were over. The first question is which party he would run for, or if he would declare for an independent party or not. My personal feelings about his popularity is that, particularly at a time when the United States faces a lot of problems, I think Americans, perhaps as other people, are looking for a knight in shining armor, a cowboy to come in off the plains, with a cowboy hat on and sort of give us a new era. And Colin Powell doesn't, at least at this point, have a lot of the bad marks against him that many of our other political leaders do. Bill Clinton, of course, is faced with this weekly because of things that keep coming out of Arkansas. There was a headline this week that said, with friends like Bill Clinton's, who needs enemies? Because more and more now of his contacts are getting close even to indictment in the United States. Colin Powell doesn't carry that kind of baggage. And, he has obviously asserted leadership, and many Americans feel that, of course, that's something we need too. If he were a centrist candidate, which apparently he would be because he's never declared himself on either end of the political spectrum, I think he would probably stand a pretty good chance if he were to run a campaign.
Yeah, I think also he's the type of figure that makes Americans feel good about themselves. Here he is, the son of black immigrants from the Caribbean, who was the first member of his family to go to college and has been extremely successful, even though he comes from a minority group. And people are very worried about the racial situation in the United States, where particularly in the black community, there was a breakdown, almost total breakdown of the family system, where drugs and crime are rampant, where blacks seem to have very little self-esteem, and it pleases a lot of people to think that, well, if Colin Powell was in a position of leadership, he might inspire the role model for young blacks. Who knows? The only problem I have with somebody like Colin Powell is you have no idea what he stands for. You have no idea what policies he would follow. And after all, America, for better or worse, is still the one country that people look to for leadership on issues. Does he know enough about the political system to rally that leadership? You get elected in a wave of popular sentiment, but then you have the alliances to help to govern. We've had, Eisenhower was all right as a president, but that's because there were all sorts of people telling him what to do, and it was a period of, there were some dangerous times in the 50s, but America was still very prosperous. None of these social problems were yet there. The main problem was dealing with the Russians, and Eisenhower had been a general and so knew about those things. So the rest of the thing did very little. There was very little domestic policy in those days. The country ran itself. It was like Japan a few years ago. Everything just, you didn't need to worry about crime and drugs and this and that. So I don't know if Colin Powell is the person, but what Mr. Largent says is absolutely correct. He has great potential popularity, and if he chose to run, probably initially it would be very much welcome.
So, but do you think it's reasonable to establish a third party in push the party in the United States? Because in the United States, typically you have two parties, and one of them was strong, and they took government and common. So,
It's very hard to imagine the candidate of a third party winning. What a third party can do is force one of the other parties to adopt its program. Now, some of the things that Ross Perot was saying, some of these right-wing Republicans are now adopting. So Ross Perot didn't, he thought he could win. He came very close. But you're right. I mean, I don't think a third party candidate and organize in every one of the states in time. And all these two big parties have machines everywhere to spread the canvassing. And I don't know. I think it's not easy. But
There's been more speculation about that again, and the fact that Paul Thomas is talking about this has helped to sort of spur that on. I too think that it's rather unlikely that, at least in the near term, any third party is going to establish any basis, on which they could be elected, especially a presidential candidate could be elected. And generally speaking, in the United States, I think that third party candidates for president tend to be, politicians that, for one reason or other, are dissatisfied with their political party and break off because they didn't get the presidential nomination, or, perhaps they have a point to make. They have a certain idea, a certain ideology that they want to make a clear part of the presidential campaign. Colin Powell doesn't really strike me as being in either of those categories. Now, if, in fact, there's some speculation now that Americans are dissatisfied with both of the political parties and they would like a third option. I think that will depend in part on now what happens in the next Congress. If the Republicans actually do fulfill some of their promises and the American public is happy with that, I think the chances for a third party being successful in the next presidential campaign would be even lower. If, in fact, the Republicans don't seem to manage any better than the Democrats did, then the chances for a third party doing better would be improved in the next presidential election.
Any other question outside of politics?
North Korea, I'd like to ask. I think you said the Congress would admit that even though some Republicans are against North Korea and the United States agreement, but I read kind of article about North Korea. They are growing cocaine or some other narcotics. So if they announce that new tax to the government, then Republicans get a good reason to turn down the agreement between the United States and North Korea. So we have to maybe prepare or think about the worst case of scenario. So if the United States Congress turns down the agreement, what would happen? What do you think Japan should prepare for that situation?
That's a good question.
well,
Yeah.
First of all, if there is proof that the North Koreans are involved actively in the drug trade, then it will cause another great uproar. 20 years ago, when North Korea had very serious foreign exchange crisis, they arrested in several countries, in Scandinavia, Sweden and Denmark, and some of the other countries like that, where North Korea had embassies. They found that North Korean diplomats were smuggling in the diplomatic pouch drugs. And they were using these drugs, they were selling them, but using them to support themselves, because they were getting no money from home. But I don't think there was any proof that these drugs were grown in North Korea. They were found elsewhere. And then they put them in the diplomatic pouch. I hadn't heard that story, that North Korea now is cultivating drugs, opium or heroin or whatever. If they are, and if they do try to sell this on the world market, it will cause an enormous uproar. And what you say is true. But if this happens, my expectation is that you'll know about it first in Japan, because the North Koreans will probably try to use their connections in Japan as to get the stuff out. Because there's not much direct traffic between North Korea and the rest of the world, right? So you'd have to use some organizational connection like Japan or Hong Kong. The North Koreans are better positioned in Japan than they are in Hong Kong. So the first evidence might be found here in Osaka to find drugs that are coming from North Korea. Then that would cause a big uproar. Then America will watch to see what the Japanese do. It'll be the other way around.
Time is running very short. We have Nikai. More question that is. Only may I introduce young friend of mine, Terada Takashi from Canberra. He is doing a PhD work at the Australian National University. And, he was a student at Dosha. When he was in the first year, I gave a lecture on his campus, Tanabe. He was so interested, he changed his major from literature to economics and ended up in Canberra, where we ran into each other several years later. And he's back here for research trips sponsored by a couple of organizations. And his home is in Osaka, so I invited him to come in. Okay, hello, ask the question.
First, I have to say I'm very sorry to be late because I'm not a student here, so I couldn't get it.
Couldn't find a way into the building.
That's right. Because I didn't have the card to enter. It took me 30 minutes. I'm writing a thesis on the Japanese foreign policy development and different cooperation issues. So, well, coincidentally, both of you mentioned something on the ethics. So that's one question in terms of the use of conversion and the ethics. Well, Mr. Immerman, you mentioned one of the basic principles of the ethics is consensus-based decision-making process. But it seems to me that if the United States tries to violate this principle, for example, in deciding the so-called investment principle, the until the global meeting, the United States is not the only country who tries to make it binding. All of the other countries disagree with the United States proposal. So, but well, at the end, the United States made a concession, but this kind of the discussion still going on, probably under the Japan leadership. So, it might be, I think, creating some impediment to the Japanese government to take some leadership to lead the Osaka meeting successfully. So, don't you think the United States, sticking to the binding investment principle, or so-called the reciprocal most favored nation treatment, is creating some disturbance or impediment to the Japanese government to make the consensus among the countries?
Oh, it will make life more absolutely. It will make life more difficult for the Japanese. But at the end of the road, consensus has to prevail. So at the end of the road, I cannot imagine that at the very end, the Americans will prevent consensus and come out with a separate opinion. But until the very end, there'll be tough bargaining. But that's what diplomacy is all about. Not to necessarily make things smooth, but to hammer out differences. So consensus doesn't mean that you start thinking alike. Consensus means that by the end, you work out a common position. And it's not easy if you're the person trying to do that. But it's good practice for the Japanese to be in that situation where they have to pull together lots of different views. That'll only be one issue. That'll only be one issue. There'll be big differences on the issue of how to implement this decision of the industrialized countries opening up by 2010 and the non-industrialized by 2020. In the case of Japan, Australia, Canada, United States, okay, we all say ourselves, we are industrialized countries. But Korea, where does Korea fit? Korean government's going to try until the end to say it's in the 2020 category. And the United States and Japan, I don't think will agree to that. And there'll be a lot of things that will cause. If it was easy, it wouldn't be a challenge for Japanese diplomacy. But it's not going to be easy. So that's why it was worth watching. But I don't think that any country should refrain at the beginning of a process from putting on the table the views that it believes. You look at the GATT. The GATT was a consensus, too. And until the very end, the Japanese refused to agree to liberalization of rice. Had the Japanese 5 years earlier said, of course, we will go along, it would be much easier. But the Japanese had their own reasons to stick to practically the last minute, as did the Koreans. It made the whole process of consensus, very difficult indeed. But that's what the whole problem of national interest is all about. You push your own interest until the very last minute. But the whole principle that's been established at APEC and by these summit meetings is that at the very end you do reach something. It's not like a UN vote where the General Assembly majority pushes something through, a minority opposes, and the minority in opposing makes sure that it never happens. So I agree with your point that's going to make life difficult for Japanese, but that's what diplomacy is all about.
Okay, anyone, the last question? No? I have a last question. Always, moderator. Don't you say, 3度目の正直, the third time is a charm? I keep hearing that recently, and I'm beginning to think that's really exactly equivalent of 3度目の正直. Third time works.
The third time works, yeah, if that's, yes, Sando me shoji, if the third time works. And I knew there was an expression in Japanese, I don't think that's necessarily a...
I've heard this twice in movies recently.
The third time
is
works.
charm.
Third time is the charm.
Yeah, but maybe not in Europe.
I haven't heard that expression that much, but it's fine.
Maybe younger people.
I haven't heard it for a while.
I said younger people. People young.
Have you heard it in recent movies?
Oh yeah, very recent. And recent young Americans in their speech. Third time is a charm. Yeah, movies. Yeah.
I guess
So maybe it's new.
I'm not seeing the right movies now.
I've heard it. Oh, certainly, I've heard it. I guess I haven't heard it for a while, but I've been living overseas too, so there's a lot
Well,
of...
you know, it works the third time. Oh, you have four things, generally an American soap. And when you are cooking something, right? Let's say you're making a meal. When you're making a meal, right? The thing that's going to be cooked last, you put in the back, right? Or you're worried about, so that's where it comes from. So, in other words, that you don't have to pay as much attention. Let's say
No priority.
lower priority. It's not going to boil as fast. Or it's not going to be ready as soon. So you put it in the back, of the burner. The things that you turn on a stove on the top, those are all the burners, the four burners, and it comes from the gas stove. But the best book to read about these expressions is, of course, William Safire.
Yes.
He has.
I read his column.
Yeah, and he does wonderful analysis of where these words come from,
Yeah.
and where the expressions suddenly appear.
Right. And what should not be used, what should be used.
That's right.
He is a very opinionated man. Very interesting. I don't find his political columns too fascinating.
No, but the Sunday
Every
he writes
Sunday.
a marvelous column called On Language.
Language. That
And his columns have been collected in book form.
every year.
And they are really quite stimulating if you are
yeah.
interested in the English language and where certain expressions come from. And it's amazing how many expressions come from Shakespeare, or from 19th century English politics, or from political expressions in a campaign. It's quite amazing.
We find that his column in the Saturday evening is every Sunday. We can find a Sunday issue. It's hard to find it. You stand on Sunday. But the Saturday evening and Sunday carries his own language. And every now and then carries his political columns. But there he's very conservative. I read his column every week. I cannot live without reading because he explained the changing society, changing values in America through changing languages. And I also buy the bound bookstore. And the titles of these books themselves are quite clever. The latest one, or maybe a year old, that I bought at the Barnes & Noble bookshop in New York, was Quoth the Maven. Quoth the Maven.
Quote the Maven.
Maven. He's a language maven, not the raven.
Okay.
And you have to know the Yiddish, and you have to know Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
One of the famous poems by Edgar Allan Poe is The Raven, the August. Quoth the raven nevermore. And that is in all the form of quotes.
Quote. Yeah.
Quoth.
Yeah, maybe not.
No.
Quoth. Instead of raven, August, use word raven. This is expert. In Yiddish.
In Yiddish,
Yeah.
right,
That
exactly.
he himself calls himself, I'm a language major. And I'm trying to become a Japanese neighbor. In Japanese, neighbor is called neighbor. I don't think I can. But for anyone seriously interested in language and communication, I recommend William Safai very much. You can buy his books in Japanese bookshops, hardcover or paperbacks. A year or two later, they all come out in paperbacks. But keep reading Asahi Evening News column. Yeah, I think we have to conclude this session, this part. 一部は終わり。次回。Thank you very much.